Why on earth did Socrates say, I owe a cock to Asclepius? Asclepius. Yes.
That one.
After he had drunk the hemlock. Why did he say this? Um, then another moment, Socrates, how his philosophical journey started, you could say, his encounter with the Oracle of Delphi. Both perhaps are relatively well-known stories, anecdotes, um, but we're going to wonder about them a little bit together. So why did he say, I owe a cock to Asclepius? There are two readings. Maybe we'll pass over to Hadley next, um, from Nietzsche and another lady, and maybe we'll come up with our own. And then let's start at the end. Let's start at the end of Socrates' journey, and then we'll speak about his beginning, the readings that we can give of um, that encounter with the oracle and how that sets him up on his philosophical journey. Why do that? I don't think that's a worthwhile question.
Sure. Nietzsche and that one lady is quite crazy. The lady's name is Runna Burger. Just so we have a face to the name that we can put to.
Can you
So
say the name again?
Runna Burger is her name.
Zoneth Burger.
Runna.
Runner.
R-O-N-A. Yeah, Runna Burger. Um,
Runner Burger.
she's in the book called Plato's Phaedo, or the Phaedo, a Platonic Labyrinth, I think is the name of the text, where she discusses this reading. But so, yeah, at the end of the Phaedo, Plato says, Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. And as the translator, who I have, says at the bottom of the text, a cock was sacrificed to Asclepius by the sick people who slept in his temples, hoping for a cure. Socrates, this is the Nietzschean reading. Socrates obviously means that death is the cure for the ills of life. Um, and so the Nietzschean reading has been so impactful that it's made it into this translator's footnote, I imagine. And so in that reading, Socrates means that death is a cure for the ills of life, and that would be in line with the school of philosophy as the art of death and dying, which was one form of ancient practice of philosophy, philosophy as getting ready for death and dying. In some readings of Plato, it's thought that death is the separation of the soul from the body. And so the separation of the soul from the body allows for the soul to be in contact with the immortal forms that are everlasting and from which the body interrupts our contact with. Our thinking is hindered by things like getting sick, having to go to sleep. It's a shame and a pity that we can't just spend all our time in pure contemplation of the forms. We have to eat and sleep and work and get sick and do all the tragic things that accompany life on a day-to-day basis. So it seems right in one sense that philosophy ought to be the practice of death and dying, where we come to know the forms by separating our soul from the body, and we practice this art of dying by learning about the true natures of things, the things that are immortal, timeless, eternal, undying, unchanging, um, those things which are sort of accessible by rationality and pure rationality alone. So this is the Nietzschean reading of Plato, and it's why Nietzsche accuses at least Socrates, entitled The Idol, of being such a monstrum in animo, an ugly person, scarred by his hatred for life. Um, as we all know, Nietzsche is a life-affirming philosopher, one who is at points charging people like Plato and maybe even Socrates at points of denying life by this sort of theory of forms and this sort of ideas that come out of Platonic texts. Whereas Runna Burger reads the text in a very different manner. Um, Her readings become quite popular in contemporary literature, from what I can see. And she reads the Socrates owing a cock to Asclepius as not a offering that's given up for a cure to the ills of life, a final escape from the unfortunate fate that is living, which stops us from accessing the pure forms themselves by themselves, but as a offering for the fortune that is Plato, who will come on the scene as a new philosopher, as someone inextricably tied to life who is engaged in a similar practice to Socrates. And the reason why she reads it in this way is because there was first of all, there's a common prejudice or tendency to think that like people have meaningful things to say at the moment of their death, like as if the wool is taken off of their eyes and they can see things clearly, and whatever they say just before their moment of death is going to be increasingly important. But textually, there's also a line that says that Plato couldn't be at the prison because he was sick on that day, and the people are confused. The people at the prison, Phaedo and the rest of the gang, are all a bit like they're all there, and it's a bit strange that Plato is not there, given that Plato is, Socrates' close student, somebody who was, I think, present at the courtroom, someone whose brothers are always around Socrates. So it seems odd that Plato's close student wouldn't be there during his final dying days when he drinks the hemlock. So Plato is sick, apparently, according to his own writing, and that's why he couldn't be there. So since Plato survived, obviously, we have his texts and we have his works. The cock to Asclepius is interpreted as being a nod to himself as living and carrying on the living philosophy, or the living legacy that is the Socratic philosophy. So those are the two
Yeah.
readings, ways of interpreting it, and yeah.
I realized I did a terrible introduction as I'm doing more and more these days. The just to so the this initial the end of Socrates' life, getting from the text, the Apology, where he has been sentenced to death and he drinks the hemlock, and it's in this moment where he's already drunk the hemlock, and I think it's, as you said, Hadley, it's like the last thing that he says before he dies. I owe a cock to Asclepius. It's a strange thing, and Asclepius is the god of healing, and you offer the practices you offer a cock to Asclepius for um, illness to be cured or something to that effect. Um, then the second moment that we'll get into after this is the moment that starts, you could say, Socrates' philosophical journey, where he encounters the oracle at Delphi. I've heard it told that he went up with um, some friends and they're asking who's the wisest of them all. Um, maybe just amongst the friends, like who's the wisest of us that are here. And the oracle points to Socrates as the wisest of them all. He doesn't buy it that he is the wisest, and then he goes around looking for the wisest person. That's the second little anecdote or story that we'll uh, cover, just to orientate.
Um, would it be helpful if
So,
we read the, the
to
excerpt?
read,
Yeah, I
yeah.
have the Phaedo in front of me. I have the Apology in front of me. It might help if we've got some actual textual orientation. It would have been nice to put it up on the screen. So I'll just read the last passage from the Phaedo, which is at 117 to 118, the Stephanus pagination. Um, so this is when Socrates is about to drink the poison, up until he does drink the poison, and it says those words. Um, so he says, hearing this, Crito nodded to the slave who was standing near him. The slave went out, and after a time came back with the man who was to administer the poison, carrying it made ready in a cup. When Socrates saw him, he said, well, my good man, you are an expert in this. What must one do? The man replied, just drink it and walk around until your legs feel heavy, and then lie down, and it'll act of itself. And he offered the cup to Socrates, who took it quite cheerfully, Echecrates, without a tremor or any change of feature or color, but looking at the man from under his eyebrows, as was his wont, asked, what do you say about pouring a libation from this drink? It is allowed. We only mix as much as we believe will suffice, said the man. I understand, Socrates said. but one is allowed, indeed one must, utter a prayer to the gods that the journey from here to yonder may be fortunate. This is my prayer, and may it be so. And while he was saying this, he was holding the cup, and then he drained it calmly and easily. Most of us had been able to hold back our tears reasonably well up until then. But when we saw him drinking it, and after he drank it, we could hold them back no longer. My own tears came in floods against my will, so I covered my face. I was weeping for myself, not for him, but for my misfortune in being deprived of such a comrade. Even before me, Crito was unable to restrain his tears and got up. Apollodorus had not ceased from weeping before, and at this moment his noisy tears and anger made everyone present break down except Socrates. What is this? He said, you strange fellows. It is mainly for this reason that I sent the women away, to avoid such unseemliness. For I am told one should die in good omen silence. So keep quiet and control yourselves. His words made us ashamed, and we checked our tears. He walked around, and when he said his legs were heavy, he lay on his back as he had been told to do. And the man who had given him the poison touched his body, and after a while tested his feet and legs, pressed hard upon his foot, and asked him if he felt this, and Socrates said no. Then he pressed his calves and made his way up his body, and showed us that it was cold and stiff. He felt it himself, and said that when the cold reached his heart, he would be gone. As his belly was getting cold, Socrates uncovered his head. He had covered it, and said these were his last words. Crito, we owe a clock to Asclepius. Make this offering to him, and do not forget. It shall be done, said Crito. Tell us if there is anything else. But there was no answer. Shortly afterwards, Socrates made a movement. The man uncovered him, and his eyes were fixed. Seeing this, Crito closed his mouth and ears. Such was the end of our comrade, Echecrates, a man who we would say was of all those we have known the best, and also the wisest and the most upright.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you for reading that.
It was a good
It is a good passage.
Did who administered it? Was it Crito? Crito's
No.
there.
Crito was there, the slave who was doing the guarding of the place got the
Yes.
libation ready, and then Socrates took it himself. It was just administered in a cup, so I think he just drank it.
Yeah, sure. This
And the note about like sending women away, I guess, was he had sent Xanthippe away, his wife, earlier in the text because she was crying and like couldn't control her crying earlier on before they started getting involved.
yeah. Yeah. The then that other piece that just stuck out this time was this Crito acknowledging that he was crying for his own loss of this man Socrates, and that was the source of his tears. And it was kind of, we were just having a conversation around whether any of us actually believes that we're going to die for ourselves. Like we encounter death and we're wondering about how we encounter death in this life. We encounter it perhaps in the social body and others dying, and then it's really difficult when it's someone close to us or someone who's benefited us greatly, like this instance. Um, but then wondering about our knowledge of the fact that that will happen to us, and almost the impossibility of that thought. So just to include that, but I think Thomas, where are you
Yes.
with all of this?
Yeah, I don't have anything interesting particular to say. I can't think that. I mean, we talked about this a bit earlier, and I can't think of anything sort of my hat to say. But it was. I think that it was interesting to me to hear it. I had read it a long time ago, and it was interesting to remember or to be told that he said that he took the hood off, that he was actually covered. And in my imagination, he wouldn't have been covered.
That's also what struck me when I was reading it, because I hadn't remembered that he took the hood off and that one of the people covered their eyes. And in the Phaedrus, Socrates has this moment. I don't know if you've ever read the Phaedrus, but it's the other text on beauty, not the symposium.
Yes.
And so the Phaedrus is one of those weird texts where like the divine madness, that's where it's like talked about most. The mania is talked about most. And Socrates gives this long speech about like beauty in relation to the muses, but he covers his head while he's doing it. He cloaks himself not to like make a fool out of himself in front of the gods in Phaedo. Um, and then like the second sailing is sometimes what it's called, is where he like takes off his cloak and then like apologizes for his like sin to the gods because he like makes a fool of them in the first speech or something like that.
He offends the god of love.
Yeah, but like once he uncloaks himself, like he can also see clearly. He's got like this like weird insight that is like divinely guided and ensured not to offend the gods or something. Like it's to make him.
See, imagine. Yeah, keep going. So
it's not that the uncloaking comes at a similar moment of divine insight, like this. We owe a cock to Asclepius comes at the exact moment after he uncloaks again. Um, so that could be like a common sort of signifier of something coming to light.
I don't know out of my head, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a classicist in this regard. Sorry, my cat is joining us. But I have a feeling that that might have something to do also with Greek ritual, that hood. Does it say that he was wearing white?
No.
Okay, because a hood is also like a priest wears a hood before he commits a sacrifice. I think. I'm sure that there's something about the hood, and then the priest hoods himself or unhoods himself at the moment of sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just interesting because like the divine sort of insights are coming at these moments, and I guess it's also interesting because like Dan brought up Crito earlier, and Crito is saying that he's really sad that he's lost Socrates, this wealth of knowledge, and it's the part that he's really sad about is that he's sad for himself because he couldn't get this knowledge or like increase in his capacity as a person because he's no longer going to be in contact with Socrates. But the Crito is the sort of text before that. And Crito shows up at the jail to try and break Socrates out early in the morning. He's bribed the guards and he's like, we're going to get you away. I think it's to Phoenicia. I can't remember where he's going. But he's organized a boat and he's organized all the means for Socrates to live elsewhere and not die, right? If he escapes, he doesn't have to die. Um, and pretty much everybody in the city seems to be happy with this, except Socrates, obviously, because it's not the right thing to do. And Socrates mounts the set of arguments about first that this was the city that he was born into, and that he has to follow the laws because he's never willingly changed cities. And then he gives these arguments for either he dies and then he won't be able to philosophize, or he leaves the city and he won't be able to philosophize. There's something about like Athens as a place, as a location for philosophy, that is good for philosophizing. Like he asks the people on the street these questions, and they don't just murder him. They aren't just annoyed at his like irritating questions, but they actually like sort of engage. There's like a level of responsiveness from them. Whereas if he goes to, I apologize to any ancient Phoenicians watching, if he goes to Phoenicia, if that's the correct place, then that's like a place of like thuggery and gambling and just feasts. I think he just complains that they're always feasting.
I think it might have been Mysia. Phoenicia was a place of great trade.
Okay, I don't know. It's some place where they were all feasting bandits, essentially. And he says, yeah, people like this, they just won't be interested in philosophy. I'll ask them a question, and then they'll be like, what's going on? Like, why are you asking me these stupid questions? Let's just get drunk and have fun and go to the feast, right? And then he says, but also if he leaves the city, he won't be able to philosophize because what kind of good philosopher would like undermine their own reputation as somebody who upholds the law and like listens to arguments from reason, all of these claims that he's making about himself. The Crito is wild. It has like zero argumentative structure. Like it's hard to make. Someone once described it as like a swarm of arguments because he's just laying out argument after argument. And then he says something odd at the end of the text, like, yeah, Crito, if I'm wrong, you should have convinced me because if you convinced me, then I could have continued to live. Like, it's like, if you argued against me, then I wouldn't have had to listen to my reason, but my reason has led me here. And so, without any argument to sway me, time to drink the hemlock, I guess, and stay in jail. We're not going to go to that show.
Yeah.
And Crito is still, after all of this, like, there are many slippery arguments in the Crito. There might be wiggle room, right? Like, Crito could maybe have refuted Socrates in the Crito. And then one would expect that he would think Socrates is not worthy of respect or learning from or knowledge. But at the end of the Phaedo, he's still convinced that Socrates must have been right, that all these arguments in the Crito were successful, and that he could have still learned from this person that has willingly given up their lives for a law that has, one might say, unjustly put him to death. Because
Yeah, I was going to say,
somewhat unjust like.
but I think
The
I wonder.
Crito.
Sorry.
Go for it, Tom.
No, I just imagine that Socrates' reply would be it is the law that put those judges in place, and those laws were the laws of the city that the laws that he was prosecuted under, and the laws of the city put those judges in front of him, and so yeah. Sorry, I was just.
But is it
Anyway,
a good
Dan, sorry, you can.
Like,
well, you've always got to obey the law. You've got to accept the authority of some. You've got to have some authority that binds you on this earth.
And why is that authority the law instead of reason? If the law is corrupt,
because if you follow only your own reason can. It's. Sorry, I'm just. I've been thinking about this a while back in context with something else. There has to be a duly
I think you're thinking
appointed.
about the.
Yeah.
You're thinking about the Christian ethic, which is submission to the law or authority just because it is authority.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of. I would say that, I mean, philosophically, some kind of you have to admit that there is some political authority.
But yeah, sure. But how is there going to be political authority if there's no individual authority? If politics is
I guess.
Then how is an aggregate of individuals going to produce a whole that can reason better than an individual can reason? But the two
Okay,
don't.
but wait. There's definitely it's definitely a
A path to
whole line of inquiry. I remember asking Larry, or we were speaking about this moment in class, I think in the context of the apology. Does the Crito speak about the same event?
Which event?
About the prison and the drinking hemlock.
Crito is like the day before, I think, and it's
Okay.
in prison. That's like the last thing before the Phaedo. So it's the
It's
dialogue.
not. Okay. No, it's not too important. The thing was that Larry's response at the time was like he was also old, you know? Like Socrates was old at this stage.
Yeah.
Like he reasonably didn't have that much time ahead of him, so it's like
Yeah.
but so but then our initial question here is why did he say this to Crito that like we owe a cock to Asclepius? And maybe it would be better for us to continue along this line of authority, um, but don't want to make too much out of this
Well, the way that
strange thing that he said.
the way that you brought it up sort of led to this conversation quite naturally, because the way that you brought it up was like this role model and like how the sort of educational role that Socrates is playing is important for his fellow countrymen, right? Like Crito is so sad about his loss of Socrates, not because of Socrates dying, but for his own sake, and presumably for the
Yes.
sake of the friends that are hanging around in the
Okay.
jail cell. But if Socrates is not a trustworthy authority, Why on earth is
Okay.
Plato sad? He should be like Nietzsche, rejoicing at the death of Socrates, right? Shouldn't he should be like Tom having a castle at the death of Socrates.
So wait. So okay, so then we locating the value for
I'm
yeah.
re I'm trying to shift the question maybe a little bit, and maybe you can tell me if you're not happy with this question. But
No, put it.
the way that I've been thinking about it since you brought up Crito is like, how do we evaluate our exemplars? How do we know whether someone's a good role model to follow? And how does that, like, I guess maybe, what does the death of somebody reveal about them or their lives? Like, is there something revealed in the moment of their dying? And does the
Yeah.
moment tell us, enable us to see, like, is it, is is the moment of their dying like a summation of their life whole? Does
Okay,
it
yes.
make sense?
Yeah.
Does it allow us to
Yeah.
read their history in a coherent manner? Or is it just an arbitrary utterance? Like, is it just something they said? Uh,
Yeah.
or is
I
it
mean,
like what's the significance and how do we judge a life maybe?
um when you were speaking initially about Nietzsche and Runneberg, about their different readings.
Yeah,
Bunneberg,
on a burger, like the food.
Runna Burger. I can't forget. Excuse me.
Escaping
This
burger.
you mentioned this cultural fact of the time, this presumption that like what is said at the moment of death carries this significance or this weight.
Mhm.
Um, and then we noticed how there was this like Socrates unveiling himself or unhooding himself before dying or before speaking, as he's
Mhm.
feeling the well he's dying from the bottom up. Um, the so then like what like I think maybe your question like how to evaluate was it how to evaluate our exemplars or and then linking that with the second part of your question like um how our exemplars die and
There's like there's a third part that I kind of want to just
y-
drop in a little bit quickly because it
yeah
just in my mind. And the third part is like, if we do take the assumption seriously that death reveals something important, allows us to understand the life of somebody, then how is it that we can find the completeness of life in a lack?
say more about that.
So, like, death is like a closure, right? It's like the final scene before the actor steps off life stage, right? And in this moment where they are not, they sort of come to be most fully what they are. In the very moment of their annulment, they concretize themselves as the individual with the concrete life history that they've had. Socrates
Yeah,
reveals himself as a certain type of character at the very moment that he's no longer an actor on the stage, a player in the game of life, right? He's gone.
it's his
And
final it's his final act.
In some ways,
um
Socrates' death is the confirmation of his belief in the immortality of the soul and the ethics that is predicated on it. He
oh
he
okay yes
has
yes
to
yeah
he
yeah
has to
like
die to he has to die to live up to the ideal that he's been speaking about. He has
well
to be
exactly.
this is
prepared to die.
exactly this is exactly where we get pointed to the necessity of thinking like the drama of the text.
Mm.
And then so it's like he would rather die than not live the examined life. So then it's like the examined life is
The examined life would terminate for him, and
yes. So
he would be impious to abandon his city because the gods chose for him to live there.
Well, I mean,
and
you
the
can also think about
yeah
the scene in the Apology, right? He talks about the possibilities of what death could be in the apology. Like it could be like a blank sleep that goes on forever, or it could be
sleep of death.
yeah, or it could be like this cool place where he gets to hang out and talk to Homer about the Odyssey, I think, is what he talks about. Like he gets to talk to all the dead poets and all the dead thinkers and philosophize with them. So like if we read it in the Nietzschean like tenor phrase, then it's a sort of self-annulment of life, and life is the illness that we're being cured of. And that could be a
Yeah.
bad thing on Nietzsche's account, because what we're supposed to be doing is affirming life by living. But on a Platonic account,
Yeah.
if the immortality of the soul is true, then the very incompleteness of life bears witness to something above and beyond it. Like in its moment of annulment, in its finding its completion through self negation or something like that, it shows that there is some beyond that, or death points to some beyond of which there is, but
And
of
it's
which we can say nothing.
yeah. And that's like this first that's that reading that is apparently so common sense that it influences translators after Nietzsche, that like he's been cured of life in
Yeah,
that moment. That's why they he asked Crito, and he says like, please make sure that you do it actually.
yeah.
Give the like make the offering to um
And the
Asclepius.
Phaedo is an
But
the Phaedo is an odd text, because the Phaedo is the text where they're arguing for recollection and the immortality of the soul. Like this is the text where they spend, I think, like three sets of arguments on just the immortality of the soul. All of them crash and burn, sort of. And then he like there's a major pause in the dialogues, as there usually is, uh, where after like the final battle against like the arguments, he tells like Fido that his hair is getting long, and that I can't remember, that he shouldn't cut it until he's like proved the immortality of the soul. Because that's like what like warriors used to do back in the. I can probably find the passage, but
Sorry, guys. Can you hear me?
yeah.
Just hold on. How much? I think I might be running out of power here. It's gonna have to change it up.
let's hope your phone isn't water.
The immortality of the phone battery.
Yeah.
You're reminded of these.
Yeah, I mean, like um, this. How do we make a way here? Like the um, what does the like? Does it? Is there something significant about what? I mean, of course, there is. What question are we asking even? Hadley, the only thing that I feel like some resistance to get, I don't know if it's resistance, but this like significance that you are attributing to the ending of life as being some kind of testament to the life that is lived.
Yeah.
I mean, Nietzsche has a similar thing when he speaks about like it's good to have an honorable death, or well, I mean that view goes past Nietzsche. It's like any warring sentiment, like conscripting to a higher cause. It's like you can die for something greater than yourself, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but there's so I mean, I think there's another death that is very close to these themes, the death of Christ, in which there are things said just prior to that moment that are um, uh, significant and pondered over. Like, what does it mean, especially that cry of like forsakenness? What does it mean for God to cry that He's forsaken by God? And the, I mean, like, I'm just, I'm almost trying to, I'm trying to resurrect this initial wondering. Like, it's like, the because this and maybe this difference, the what got it started talking about Crito would be helpful, because the we were thinking there in this difference in terms of where the loss is occurring. So like the Socrates asks his wife to leave because she's getting too emotional, because she's going to lose Socrates. Um, I just remembered an anecdote about. I don't know if this is true, and I'm sorry if this is way by the side, but it's this um, it's some movement teacher that was speaking about Socrates and the okay, nah, I'm gonna leave that by the side. The for Crito and for everyone around him and for Socrates' wife, the person that they were losing was Socrates, and Socrates was an exemplar for them. They loved him dearly. For Socrates, it's his own life that he's losing. So now we can relate to the phenomena of death of an other in and then of an other that is an exemplar for us or that we love. Um, but then our own death is this it's this like this impossible now thought. How to the thought itself is impossible. So then the question comes to more of one of like relatedness to it. So then are we imagining that we are like just hoping that at the time of death that we say like the coolest thing?
Well, I mean, you're like there's separate senses of death like going on there, I imagine. Like there's like the biological death that's happening, and even in that, like can we witness our own death or can we experience our own death? That seems to be like presupposing and depending on some sort of maintenance of consciousness while we pass into this new state. If it's anything like going to sleep, I often don't remember going to sleep. It just happens and then, it's done. And when I wake up, I'm usually glad to remember that it's me in the morning and that I have my stuff to do. But, I could imagine going crazy and fall asleep and wake up the next morning and go, who's this? And be very, taken aback by it. Stranger things have happened, Tom. But
To you, yes.
yeah, of course. But you know, so it seems like even as an individual, whether we can witness our own death biologically is something else. Like whether we can experience it or whether it just happens to us. How do we relate to that happening? Do we at all? Socrates is in a privileged position in some ways, because he's not because he gets to kill himself, uh, but because he is there. He's aware that he's going to die. He knows that the poison has been prepared. In the Crito, the ships are delayed, so it's taken longer than he thought it would. But ordinarily, uh, unfortunately, sorry, spoiler alert, we don't get to choose or pick our place of death, our point of departure. It just sort of happens. And even that seems to be sort of very different. Being surrounded by his friends as he was, by Crito, by Phaedo, by the rest of the gang, philosophizing, that's all very nice, I imagine.
It's a great death, yeah. Yeah.
I've heard a similar story about Hannah Arendt. Like she was throwing a dinner party and then she like slipped off to her room, like fell asleep and then just never woke up.
Yeah.
Very cute in terms of philosophical deaths. Sounds like she was a bit
There's
stoked about
there's
it.
there's a um this Paramahamsa Yogananda was saying a speech, and then just like mid speech he dies.
Um, and so like on the one,
Aquinas died on the way to a council, an ecumenical council, and said, and as he died, he was granted a beatific vision, which was a vision of God. And he said, "Everything I have written is but straw."
all of these are really interesting. But there's like the second side. Sorry, I just want to complete this thought before it slips away.
Yeah, yeah.
So on the one hand, we can't imagine death or we can't think death. We can relate to it. We can see another die. We can be in the presence of another dying. They can die. Perhaps they can experience it. Maybe they can't in the ways that I've just described. Maybe they black out. Maybe they pass away. Maybe they just don't retain consciousness in that way once experience ends. Um, but then there's the other problem with the observer, right? The observed, the dying one, if they slip out and are unconscious of the actual cessation of life, then they don't witness their death. We witness their death, right? The observer is the only one that actually experiences the death because the person's not there for the death, right? They're dying. So
Mm.
it seems like an even more complex phenomenon. It seems like neither party is relating to it in the appropriate manner, or like as if it were even possible to relate to it in the appropriate manner.
Yeah. Yeah, the um
Doubly lacking.
it's doubly
Sorry?
lacking.
Yeah, it's like doubly
Lovely
lacking.
lacking.
Like we can't experience it from the observer side, but we also only can experience it from the observer side. And the dying person can experience it, but also can't experience it because they biologically die, but they might not be conscious of their biological dying.
The it, it's minimally like that beyond which we can't think or experience. We think or we presume. So so then like the observer in the sense of the one who's witnessing or has another die, you left with well their corpse and then what remains of them, memory and influence and thought. Um, but you, how were you pointing at the failure of the observer
You're not
to
dying.
relate to death?
You're alive.
In
You're
the
alive.
okay, yes, yeah,
You're not the dead
yes,
one.
okay, yeah,
You're alive.
you
You're
know
left
to
with the impression of death and all that it brings with it. You gotta get the coffin ready and do the ceremonial burial things. But you have to go on.
it's not first person.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
there's work to do the next day. You'll get
yes.
your leave and you have to go on about your life. The dead person, dead, unfortunate, but they're not, you know, going to come back and continue living. They're done with life, whatever that means.
I also really enjoyed the almost simple description of like the legs going cold, like dying from the bottom. And then Socrates is like when I mean this is the it's even difficult the difficulty of speaking about it because it's like when it's at my heart and it's like what is at my heart when an absence is at my heart. So when that feeling of the absent or the coldness when my heart goes cold also then I will die. It's like from the feet up. Um,
Uh, that's really interesting, actually. This is a super rich text. Um, so the initial thing about the leg and the pain, it starts way earlier on. This is he talks about like the pleasure and pain that he feels because I think his leg has been unchained because he's like got like this chain on his leg to keep him in place, and then they release it, and so he feels pleasure at the release. I think I should really find the paragraph and not speak out of my faint memory, but it seems apt on the text on recollection. So he feels this pleasure at the site where his leg has been released from the chains, but it's also painful because there was a chain wrapped around it. So he feels this mixture of pleasure and pain, and he says that it's like tied at the heads because like pleasure and pain can't exist in the same point in the same place, and all the good old logical laws of the principle of non-contradiction. And the hot and cold also might be something like that. Like the heat in the heart that keeps the blood flowing and all this stuff, but he feels the cold coming up from his leg. So there's like heat mixed with cold. there's an argument about becoming and coming to be and passing away, whether souls come from previous souls or not, in this text. So there's all of this rich stuff going on. I found the part on his pleasure and pain. I'll just read it. This is after he sends Xanthippe away. Um, it's at 60b. Socrates sat up on the bed, bent his leg, and rubbed it with his hand. And as he rubbed, he said, "What a strange thing that which men call pleasure seems to be, and how astonishing the relation it has with what is thought to be its opposite, namely pain. A man cannot have both at the same time. Yet if he pursues and catches the one, he is almost always bound to catch the other also, like two creatures with one head. I think that if Aesop had noticed this, he would have composed a fable that a god wished to reconcile their opposition, but could not do so. So he joined their heads together, and therefore, when a man has the one, the other follows later. This seems to be happening to me. My bonds caused pain in my leg, and now pleasure seems to be following." One might also think about that in terms of the death, right? Crito is crying, presumably there's pain, and that might also be good evidence for Burger's reading. Plato might be the sort of pleasure that comes after the pain, like
Oh,
sort of penance with a
I would
sad,
have
yeah.
I would have thought that would be proof of Nietzsche's reading. The pain the
Yeah.
pain being the pleasure being a kind of he's enjoying the act of dying.
Yeah, the immortality of the afterlife, right? Uh, the pain being that he dies and then he goes to the afterlife, and then there's sort of some sort of pleasure in the immortality of the soul or something like that. He can just engage in the pure thinking that he ought to. Could be textual evidence for either. Seems like precisely the kind of thing that would lend itself to both ends, right?
Yeah,
Oh, can I throw in a Kierkegaard quote that I read the other day? I don't actually remember it.
hmm.
He was talking, it's in Revelation. He was talking about when you break a young girl's heart, it's important to make sure that they cry, because just like a scab, the blood is good.
Ah,
So it's like
yeah,
the blood wets the scab, the tears wet the soul. Uh, it's
it's
important.
important to, yeah, sure. Uh, I wonder,
Ooh.
well, I hope Socrates' wife cried. I wonder who would have been responsible for making that happen in the Kierkegaardian sense, because Socrates was gone. I wonder if Crito did give a cock to Asclepius. I mean, yeah, he probably would have. I mean, there's just this pain pleasure simultaneity, or that's more poetic expression there is also. But I'm more wondering just about this I can't help for another word, but just like insistence as to wanting to. I mean, like why? I guess it's just the means at the moment is the question. Like, why did Socrates ask for the cock to be given to Asclepius? But that's just like a band-aid for this question. That's like, what of death? Or but it's so hard to even like have the question or to, and then it's like, why would you even press? Um, and
Yeah,
then
death is a good is a good way to put it. It's like you're
say
trying to
again.
cover the band-aid on death is a great way to close it. Trying to cover up this huge gash with this tiny piece of like filament, and like I guess epistemologically at least the gash being death, like we can't think it, right? Or like it seems like the difficult thing is trying to think about death because
Yeah.
it's conceivable. And so we like have to put the band-aid of like tools for thought like, and try to patch up this gaping hole in our knowledge so that like it doesn't scare us, or that we're like related to it properly, like we know what to do with it. But the patching up, I'm not sure is the appropriate manner.
Oh, you're looking inside Thomas's nose.
In my ear. Sorry, my phone is very quiet, so I'm like putting it to my ear so I can hear you guys.
I didn't see the progression, but like the
Yeah. You're getting an earful.
what's the observance then that they are giving at the deathbed? Because like they start crying when Socrates says something, and then he tells them to get a grip. So how are they attending to it then? They're just noticing. They're just
Well, it looks like so. The passage again. He drinks the cup. Um, Most of us had been able to hold back our tears reasonably well up until then, but then we saw him drinking it, and after he drank it, we could hold them back no longer. My own tears came in floods against my will, so I covered my face. I was weeping for myself, not for him, but for my misfortune in being deprived of such a comrade. Even before me, Crito was unable to restrain his tears and got up. Apollodorus had not ceased from weeping before, and at this moment his noisy tears and anger made everyone present break down, except Socrates. What is this? He said, you strange fellows. It is mainly for this reason that I sent the woman away, to avoid such unseemliness, for I am told one should die in good omen silence, so keep quiet and control yourselves. His words made us ashamed, and we checked our tears. And then he continues to walk around. What? Um, Then he tells Crito that we owe a clock to Asclepius, and then Crito says, it shall be done, said Crito. Tell us if there is anything else. But there was no answer. Um, Shortly after, Socrates made a movement, the man uncovered him, and his eyes were fixed, and then Crito closed his mouth and ears, his mouth and eyes. And that's all the details we get. So it's like, at one
yeah.
moment, there was this unrestrained, like, flooding of tears. Like, everybody just broke down, couldn't handle it anymore. They were like, oh God, there he goes, I guess.
Yeah.
His face was also very interesting. Like this covering, and then Socrates uncovering himself just before speaking, dramatically.
Yeah.
But it's like they're trying to hold back this immense pain that's coming. And then Socrates, being the person that he is just like, what's wrong with you guys? Get a grip. Stop. And then they say something like, his words made us ashamed, and we checked our tears. Like, even at the moment of death, he still has this power of shaming people, which he like continuously uses, right? Like in the apology, he says something like, yeah, all these kids just follow me around because I just shame the people, like the people in power in public. Like they just like to see people get like taken down to this level. And so like the shame has been used in this positive way to like quell the tears. And it seems like they've like got themselves together. Crito's like, it shall be done. Like, like I'm gonna follow through on this promise. All good. Then he closes his eyes and mouth. Um, and so it seems like he's pulled himself together. And somehow they've gone from this like extreme flooding of pain to like this like stable place through.
That would suggest a power of speech to kind of move that. How do I put this? It suggests that speech can contain death. I don't mean that's a bit ambitious. I think that's a bit ambitious in the circumstances. But someone like Socrates speaking. Sorry.
I thought you were going to say something much more mundane, maybe something like that reason mediates between pleasure and pain, or something like that. That there's this ability of speech to sort of quell pain and deride from too much pleasure.
Yeah, I think that's probably more accurate. I was
But
perhaps a bit exuberant.
is it because you've had the castle, or is the
Sorry?
have you had the castle, or?
No, no.
But say more about
That's why I'm not making any sense.
Tom, you need
say
to
more about
pour for the dead homies as a libation.
I've
libation.
done that
Yeah, I
before.
was wondering also what that meant. The Thomas, say more about speech containing death.
Yeah, it was a bit of a. It may have been a bit of a. This is an analytic philosopher in me coming out. It's maybe a bit of exuberance, but there's a possibility there that, in a way, because in order for speech to be able, the speech, particularly of someone like Socrates, to kind of put you at ease, he's got to be a certain kind of person, and that power that comes from that power seems to suggest that there's something about speech being able, because okay, you are inconsolable because of the death of someone you love. My consolations to you are going to be somewhat tepid, but someone who really knows, if someone really knew that death was not the end, like Socrates does, chastises you for that, and you know that he's chastising you for that expression, and he's chastising you for the womanish display of emotion. There's something in that I think suggests that, or it's suggestive that of the idea that Plato is definitely, well, I mean, this is continuous with his doctrine that death is not the end.
Yeah, that, or he's just a liar, right?
What?
Nietzsche accuses him of being. But he's just very.
No, but I think it's more. I think this is a moment where we come to reflect on our activity now and trying to, in a sense, like trying to unveil death. Like we're trying to think it, or we're like wondering about it. Um,
Put
so like
lipstick
Tom,
on it.
the I think you just put lipstick on it by saying that Socrates thinks that he survives death, or like what gives him authority is that um, he's in some way like in a position of knowing, and he uh, well, yeah, he survives death in some way, so that's why he can speak at the precipice of death and quieten his friends. I was laughing at the enjoyment that you had in
In what?
in the way you express yourself. I'll leave it there. The the
I was just trying to. I was scrambling. I was scratching for the ideas. That's what I was actually doing.
no, but do you see what like the I'm accusing you of putting lipstick on the situation.
Okay. Sorry.
No,
I'm also not sure about this like womanish accusation, which is why I've tried to like highlight it several times. Like he does send Xantippe away for crying in an unseemly manner. Uh, he says something like, "This is at 60. Socrates recently released from his chains. After a short time, he came and told us to go in. We found Socrates recently released from his chains, and Xantippe, you know her, sitting by him, holding their baby. When she saw us, she cried out and said the sort of thing that women usually say. Socrates, this is the last time your friends will talk to you and you to them. Socrates looked at Crito. Crito, he said, let someone take her home. And some of Crito's people led her away, lamenting and beating her breast. And that like line about like she's real upset. She's like unconsolably like hurt, and also she's just been sent away. Like what on earth was going on there? Like she comes in, she's like, "Yo, this is the last time you're ever gonna speak to your friends, my guy." Like take this as a moment to like honor the gesture of like being in the presence of your homies, and he's like, "Crito, send her home."
no, but they felt like an appropriateness to that moment. It's almost like she's the one who recognizes the change now. Like she's had her time with Socrates with their child, And
No, no,
then
no. It's
Socrates.
not just that. Like when she gets sent away, like beating her breast is like I think he's got like lines in the Republic, similar lines, and I don't know my Homer well enough about like I can't remember if it was like Troy or somebody like or Odysseus like rolling around on the floor beating their breast, like at the loss of something.
Yeah.
And this is like the section on justice and becoming. There's like all of these like weird like nods, and I'm wondering like he chastises them for responding womanishly to his death, right? But this is like after four failed arguments for the immortality of a soul and one strange myth. Um, and one has to wonder. Maybe I'm just playing the villain too much here. One has to wonder like whose response is appropriate. Um, like
Okay. Yeah.
what's the is the appropriate response the tears and the sadness, the recognition of pain? Is life over at death, or ought we be happy? How do we respond?
The
Because like if
yeah.
Nietzsche's right, and this is just a life denying philosophy, it's tragic. This man is dead, right? We should have cried. We'll never get the chance again to cry, right? The moment is
Damn.
lost, right? He's he's ruined the moment. He's spoilt the mood. He's taken away his own opportunity for mourning, and that's tragic. It's more tragic than like him just dying, right?
And he left Crito with the idea that he could have argued him out of it.
Yeah.
That's brutal. That's
What an arsehole.
dramatic.
There's just, like, I mean, I don't. The thing is, I really like Plato and I really like Socrates as a character, but you've got to wonder what on earth his character does sometimes, like, and how not only how reliable, uh, it's quite clear that we have framed Socrates in a certain way in our tradition for the entirety of Western philosophy as like the sort of purveyor of philosophy, and I think that it's probably right. But I don't think we should do it in a dumbfounded manner where we just take his authority for granted, because that seems super unphilosophical. As if
Yeah.
he's he's the Messiah. He's gonna tell us what's up, right? Like he's got all the answers. That seems like the worst possible thing that we could do is to take him at face value on his word. Because first of all, he claimed not to know anything. That in itself, kind of a red flag. Second of all, like it would seem to undermine the very project of inquiry that like he says is the soul's activity. And that just seems both of those just seem super dangerous. Like especially if the result is that death is like that we ought to separate the soul from the body. There's a weird argument in this text about why we shouldn't kill ourselves. Like, I think it's like, yeah, as owners of pets, we would be bummed if our pets killed themselves. So too, the gods would be bummed if we killed ourselves.
I thought it was because we hear as a punishment. I seem to remember reading that.
I don't remember the argument. I just remember it being fairly ridiculous. But if the separation of the soul is all we're aiming for, there's quicker means, unfortunately,
Yes. Yeah.
and those means are dangerous, especially if there's nothing afterwards.
Yeah. Or more than that, if what is afterwards is what it's all about.
Mhm.
Like if you're cured by death, then
Seems
that's an argument for if those arguments were not made against suicide, it would be
yeah,
exactly what Nietzsche's kind of getting upset about.
quite a scary argument if you take it like to its conclusion. Right? If philosophy is the practice or the art of dying and staying dead,
Preparing.
then those people that object and say that they should be dead. They're just so annoying. Maybe they're right.
Did you just say now that philosophy is the art of preparing for death and staying dead?
The art of death and dying? Yeah, that's how it's sometimes put.
Okay, okay. The yeah, it's preparation for death.
Sometimes it's
Which
put
is
as staying dead as well.
say again?
Sometimes it is put as the art of dying and staying dead, or the art of dying, like learning how to die, and that might
Yeah.
also be particularly important for a text talking about recollection, the immortality of the soul, and presumably some sort of anamnesis. We remember the souls from our previous lives, and if life is something like a way station for the soul, right? My soul comes into my body and then reincarnated at some point or something. If life comes from life or something like that, then if we do die and death is not the final word and we do come back, as one other culture at least has recommended, then we might need to prepare to stay dead. If life is a curse, if it's the worst, that might be very much an Eastern sort of flavor on the way of looking at this death thing.
Yeah.
Because again, the text is talking about recollection, right? The immortality of the soul. We remember the forms from when our souls were immortal, but now they're not immortal or in a mortal body. I'm not really clear on how the immortal soul comes to be embodied, or if the concept makes a lot of sense. But it's an interesting concept. And also how it solves the problem of knowledge that it is attempting to solve in the Meno. We remember the forms from our previous life, but how do we know them in our previous life? Because we had to learn them at some point. So why suggest the life before this one?
It seems to kick the can down the road.
Yeah, you're just shifting the problem to another place, aren't you?
Thomas's ear is speaking to us.
Yes, that's the ultimate confusion of the senses.
The air is speaking. Be quiet.
Yeah. It's like Beckett wrote a play. I think at the end it's just like a tape recorder or a mouth just speaking, and it's very much giving that sort of vibe, Thomas.
Thanks, guys.
I can see you can smile. Yeah, I was just thinking again of that physiological description. I couldn't. My mind goes to that again, like this, like dying from the bottom up. Um, yeah,
Apparently, I seem to. Maybe I just got this from movies, but people always say that they feel cold when they're dying.
Presumably, I would imagine that in contemporary times, we would say that we die from the top down because of brain death. Is what we use to label people as dead. So,
Well, I
maybe
think
yeah. I mean that's like a whole. That's a whole. I mean, like where the definition of death is. Even if we take a very
he talks about it reaching
modern.
his right.
Say again?
He talks about it reaching his heart.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
contemporary times, we talk about death as in brain death, which is a different.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to go now. We've been at it for 2.5 hours.
All right.
This is the death
Ciao,
of my
Thomas.
contribution to the conversation.
Thank
All
you.
right.
It's been good.
Cheers, Hadley.
Please, if you want to pick this
Cheers.
up,
Sorry?
maybe, oh no, I was gonna say if we want to pick this up, it might be worth just checking out the Phaedo.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a nice theme actually. I think it's something that's
Death.
if because we said before we started the recording that death is not something that seems to be appropriately dealt with in modern culture, and it would be a good thing to reflect on it then.
You get the one
Yeah,
day
it's difficult. Yeah,
you get the one day of leave to sort out all your like funeral requirements and stuff, and then you get to cry it all out in a day, carry on with your life, go back to work the next day. It's an odd response to the phenomenon, especially
yeah,
it's lost as a whole person. Um, that's a lot.
yeah.
All right. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers, Tom.
Auf Wiedersehen. What the... it's a difficult subject to get right. Um, to approach properly. Yeah, I guess the texts are kind of invaluable in that sense. But also not kind of getting too finicky about them,
Mhm.
because it also has to touch your life, and
I
yeah,
think
that
keeping the guiding question, like reading the text in reverse almost, uh, would be a good way to do that. So just like keeping the guiding question of like, why does Socrates say, "I owe a cock to Asclepius"? The end.
yeah, yeah.
And kind of making sense of
Maybe
that.
you can. Could you give us like a one sentence answer, and then that will be the closing. No pressure.
No,
No. No, but it doesn't make sense. The, why does why does why does Socrates ask Asclepius to offer a why does Socrates ask Crito to offer a cock to Asclepius? No.